Hello, you're watching BBC News. I'm Shaun Ley with the latest headlines. There are fears for Kabul, the Afghan capital, after Taliban fighters captured the country's second city, Kandahar, in a crushing blow for the Kabul-based government. It follows the fall of several key cities Thursday. International aid agencies are warning of a humanitarian catastrophe. 250,000 people are already displaced. The UN estimates 80% of those forced to flee are women and children. In the UK, a 3-year-old girl and her father are among the victims named by police in Plymouth after the country's worst mass shooting since 2010. Thursday, a 22-year-old local man killed 5 people before turning the gun on himself. Emergency services in Italy continue to fight wildfires burning in parts of the south and centre of the country amid an enduring heatwave that set an unofficial European temperature record. Hello and welcome to our look ahead to what the papers will be bringing us on Saturday morning. Joining me tonight, Geraldine Scott. Geraldine is political correspondent for the Press Association, which provides news to broadcasters and journalists, not just in this country, but around the world. And James Lewis is a broadcaster and journalist himself. Welcome to both of you. Tomorrow's front pages, let's bring you right up to date with what we have so far. And let's start with the Times and its headline, "Gun Licence Given Back to Killer Weeks Before Attack," referring to the mass shooting which occurred in Plymouth Thursday night, along with a photograph of the killer's mother, who was his first victim. A Daily Telegraph investigation has discovered holidaymakers are being charged up to 4 times the official advertised price for the COVID test they have to take. The FT's weekend edition says the Taliban has surrounded Afghanistan's capital and seized the country's second largest city. According to the Eye, proposals to make working from home a legal right are unlikely to happen as ministers fear the unintended consequences. And The Guardian has the story, Treasury accused of blocking green policies as the government's net zero commitment is cast into doubt. Right, let's plunge straight in. Geraldine, do you want to kick us off with that front page I referred to first of all, and this story about Jake Davison's gun licence?
Yeah, there seems to be increasing questions, don't there, over how Jake had this gun and license when it had been removed from him previously and had been, handed back after allegations of assault previously had been brought up. I mean, this is a tragic story, isn't it? And seeing the face of Sophie Martin on so many of the front pages really hammers home the real tragedy of this, the 3-year-old girl that's been caught up in this. I think there are other questions as well, though, not just about the gun licence, but about potential referrals to mental health services that have been made by his family, and also of this internet culture, this incel culture that we really don't understand, or that people in positions of power potentially don't understand, which seems to have played quite a serious role in the mindset that he may have been in. So I think there are multiple lines of inquiry the police will be following, of course, and multiple questions that need to be answered.
James, we're back again to the question. Which, I mean, this is the story takes up pretty much the whole of the front page of the Times, which in some ways is surprising given, the fast-moving events in Afghanistan. But they're kind of, as the paper establishes, there are so many different angles to this story, aren't there?
Absolutely, and obviously it's it's the deadliest mass shooting we've had in this country for a decade. So obviously found to be, dominating the front pages. It's obviously tragic, and I think as Geraldine has said, there's so many questions to answer here, and lots of people that I think have a lot of questions to answer. And I think we're going to find out more over the coming days as well about this. Obviously, the police have a lot to answer for, I think, over the fact that he was given the licence back so quickly. And obviously, that's what a lot of the newspapers are going with for tomorrow. That's the sort of the big line from this. The mental health stuff as well, I think, is obviously a big part of this as well. And obviously how sort of things seem to be sort of unchecked with it all. But I think certainly today and tonight, I think it's important that we sort of stop and take a moment to remember those that have lost their lives. And, I mean, the 3-year-old girl is the one that sticks in my mind. It's obviously more than all of them. I mean, obviously all of them are tragic. It's hard to sort of contemplate, really. And obviously we've seen the picture, I think, of the daughter and her father. And it's just difficult to sort of understand really, to be honest.
Yeah, and it is, and it's, as ever with these things, that The Guardian has got that photograph, which is sort of winter photograph. So obviously, several months old. She's a toddler at this point. But as you say, and it's also trying to make rational and provide a rational, logical explanation for the irrational act, or what turns an act of self-loathing into an act of hatred that kills so many other people. As you say, this is not a story that I suspect is going to disappear from the front pages for a few more days yet. But let's move on to the one that is dominating a lot of our coverage today, and unsurprisingly is the source of so much concern. James, the front of the Taliban has a picture of the FT, I should say, has a picture of a mum lost her husband in fighting with her children in a refugee camp in Kabul, or a camp for displaced people in Kabul. People are fleeing. We're told the UN is saying I think 80% of the people who've fled so far are women and children.
Yeah, and obviously it's very concerning about sort of what impacts this. All of what's happening is going to have on all the great work that has been done over the last 2 decades in terms of education and women's rights and all that type of thing. So it's going to be, obviously, it's very, very concerning time for people that are out there. I'm not surprised that people are looking to flee. And yeah, it's very worrying. And obviously, just sort of how this all pans out now over the next few weeks, next few days even. Obviously, what's happening in Kabul. Obviously, there's major concerns about whether lots of other cities are going to be overrun by the Taliban, and big question marks over whether we should have withdrawn as quickly as we should have done. And I think there are a lot of people that have been involved in Afghanistan over the last 20 years, and a lot of them have come out and said it today. Obviously, Tom Tugendhat, I think, was one of the ones that I saw today that said quite a lot on social media and across different media platforms about how the move by America and by the British government has been the wrong one in terms of pulling out, and it's going to undo a lot of the good that has been done. But then obviously the bigger question around all of this is whether we should have gone in the first place 20 years ago. But obviously we are where we are now, and we have to find solutions. And I think, do we sit back and let this all happen in front of our eyes? I'm not sure that we can do nothing about it. And I think there are a lot of British troops and a lot of families of those troops as well that will be sitting at home thinking to themselves, what was it all for, to be honest?
I mean, that obviously is a thought we'll return to in a minute, because it's partly the subject of the Telegraph front page. But just on this story, Geraldine, the FT is absolutely explicit here in saying that Ben Wallace, the British Defence Secretary, criticised Washington, saying it was not the right time or the right decision to make. Because, of course, Al-Qaeda will probably come back, whatever they call themselves, whatever jihadist organisation. I mean, it's one of those rare occasions, isn't it, where, yes, we've gone along with Washington, but the British government are making it pretty clear that they don't agree.
Yes, and not just Ben Wallace. Boris Johnson has, kind of said that this is the almost inevitable conclusion of Washington making that decision as well. So it does seem there's kind of a united front there. You had Johnny Mercer, the MP, who of course himself served in Afghanistan, say on breakfast television this morning as well that Joe Biden has a lot of responsibility here, but that we have to take it too. Of course, what comes next is looking pretty grim at the moment. It's not looking like a good outcome, and we know from past experience that when troops withdraw from Afghanistan without a plan in place, that does provide a breeding ground for terrorism, and that is the fear now. And if we're talking about what Ben Wallace has said today, he has said himself that it's likely that that's going to be the case. So you can see why those families of veterans sitting at home, maybe some of those who lost their lives, are pretty stung by this and are thinking it's in vain despite the Prime Minister's protestations.
Yeah, indeed. Taking us on the same subject, this is Ben Riley-Smith and Ben Farmer's piece in the Telegraph tomorrow, Geraldine. British troops did not die in vain in Afghanistan, says Johnson. But, I mean, it's going to be quite a hard argument for politicians to sustain, isn't it? If we end up in a situation, let's say that Kabul falls in a matter of weeks, the Taliban are back in control, and then they choose to be the kind of government they were in the 1990s, with the level of violence against their own people, the retribution of those who committed what perhaps outside of that interpretation of the Quran might seem less serious crimes, and certainly not crimes that merited the kind of brutality that was meted out, and also becomes again a place where jihadist groups can operate with impunity.
Yes, I think so. And I think the argument that Boris Johnson was trying to make earlier on today was that actually Britain's streets are safer than they were 20 years ago from a risk of terrorism because we went through Afghanistan. And maybe that's true, but that is a very insular way of looking at it and doesn't really speak to our responsibilities around the world as a, global superpower, especially in establishing this country's identity as we move forward. So I don't really think that argument is going to hold for very long. It's just a terribly sad situation, and it looks like it's only going one way.
James, on that Telegraph story, what do you make of it?
I mean, I think it's highly concerning, isn't it? I think the other side of this as well is the Afghani government and what their role in all this as well, in terms of if there is corruption within that particular administration and how they're dealing with the Taliban. I mean, at some point, the British and the American forces do have to pull out and allow the Afghani society to handle things for themselves. But clearly, it's not going to plan, and the Taliban are in a position of strength, it feels like, at the moment, and it is hugely concerning. And I don't know. I think that, obviously I've already said it, really. I think there's going to be a lot of people sitting at home, wondering, what was it all for? Have lives been lost for no reason? Those question marks are going to be going through people's minds, clearly. And obviously Boris Johnson has said that, domestically we are in a stronger position because of going in. But if the Taliban establish themselves and build up their strength to such an extent where they feel strong enough within their own domestic position, then they may well become more of a threat again to the West. So we'll have to see what happens and see if the American military and the American administration, the Biden administration, decide to do anything different, and whether we follow suit, because normally we do, I think.
I mean, it's very timely you say that, because a bit of copy has just dropped literally in the last about a minute and a half from the Reuters news agency, from its bureau in Washington. The Republican leader in the Senate, Mitch McConnell, has called on President Biden to hammer Taliban advances, and not least with airstrikes, which presumably would be one way of at least perhaps delaying the momentum of this move by the Taliban, whose fighters are about 45 miles from Kabul at the moment. I mean, to kind of illustrate this, the Eye, James, has a very powerful photograph and a quote from Patrick Coburn, a very famous journalist on the Independent during the 1980s and 1990s, and Kin Sen Gupta, who's out in Kabul at the moment, saying, look, how different is this to how the picture looked 30 years ago, in effect?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is the thing, isn't it, really? And what the Biden administration chooses to do next is going to be very, very important. And I think, at the end of the day, lives are at stake, and the legacy of Afghanistan is at stake here as well. Like, obviously, there has been a lot of great work that has been done by a lot of people, not just the military, but those that have gone in to support, that are there to done the educational part of things there, and in terms of the working on women's rights and all that. There's so many things that could be unravelled if this Taliban advance continues. There is so much at stake, and we don't want to go back. They want to move forward, I'm sure, and This is. I don't know what else to say other than it's hugely concerning, hugely worrying, and I feel like we can't just sit on our hands in the West, considering we've made such a big had such a huge amount of time invested into going into Afghanistan over the last 20 years. We can't just say, well, wash our hands of it and we're done. I just don't feel like we can do that at all. Here in Britain, here in the UK, and also in America as well, and the rest of our allies as well. I don't think we can do that at all. Geraldine,
it's not clear if this photo is now or is a photo from that period. I mean, because the dress, of course, because it's traditional dress, that's very hard to tell, and shouldering a Kalashnikov doesn't really date it much either. But it's quite a potent image, isn't it?
it's a very powerful image. And of course, we are already hearing reports as well that the Russians are concerned about this withdrawal of troops too. So, bringing that into the context of what we saw, 30 years ago is very important. And this is going to be watched by global leaders for how this progresses. And there will be questions to be answered over, how this has been handled.
On to another story, Geraldine, different subject. Got a couple more subjects still to cover. First one is crackdown on COVID travel test cowboys on the front of the Telegraph.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think travellers will maybe sigh a bit of relief at this, because we've heard multiple stories, haven't we, of the kind of the COVID testing and things like that, sometimes exceeding the prices of airline tickets to go abroad. But yes, the government has announced that they're going to crack down on those who are their, approved providers, maybe advertising a very cheap price to get bumped up to the top of the list. And then when you click through onto the website, you find that you're paying 4 times as much, or that only one test centre that you have to go to in person is offering that particular price. So this will be welcome. Of course, it doesn't really make the whole process of travelling much simpler or much more welcome for a lot of people, but I'm sure it will be a bit of a relief that it's going to be a little bit cheaper.
It does make you wonder, James, what's taken them so long?
Oh, I just think there needs to be a fixed price as well, doesn't there? Like, this is how much it costs. I don't think any of us know how much a PCR test costs, because there are so many different prices around. It's ludicrous. It really is. And I think the other part of this, I was just reading that little part of the front page on the Telegraph there about it, is that there are calls now for people that are double vaccinated only to only need to use lateral flow tests, which rather than PCR tests, which are actually cheaper, of course. So that's the part of it as well. And I think down the line, I think maybe that might be a better way to go, because ultimately, I think once we've got the double jabs now, we're obviously in a much stronger position. And yeah, I just think it's unusual that no one really knows how much a PCR test costs. No one knows how much it's going to cost them on top of their trip. And this is the other thing about all this as well. It's not just people going on a holiday. Obviously, this is a big part of their holidays, but people that are seeing family abroad that they've not seen for 12, 15 months at a time, and they're desperate to go back, and they're being given this huge bill on top with the PCR test as well. There needs to be a fixed price, surely. That's got to be the solution to it. So everyone knows it costs X amount, and then there can be no arguments.
Price gouging is what it looks suspiciously like, doesn't it? Let's move on, James. Final story, really. This is a lovely story on the front of the FT, all about the Lord of the Rings, which we all know the films were filmed in New Zealand and that wonderful landscape, but the TV series is coming to the UK.
Yeah, interesting, isn't it, this one? Because obviously when you think of the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit films, you think of those amazing views across New Zealand that make up, obviously, the fantasy thing that is Middle-earth. I'm showing a bit of my nerdy side now, knowing about this. Yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting. Maybe, with this new series, we're going to see great parts of the British landscape instead then, perhaps, because we're going to clearly have to see it, because obviously the views that we did see in those other films were so spectacular. They're going to have to find a way of replicating it within the UK, and there are obviously some lovely spots across the whole of this country. A chance to showcase it, won't it, I suppose?
Well, it certainly did a lot for the New Zealand tourist industry, didn't it, Geraldine?
It did, and I've been myself as well. So I contributed to the tourist, the tours that went around the sets and things like that. And it is very good. So I can imagine that plenty of people will be coming to see it. And of course, in that story on the front there, it does say that the slightly looser COVID measures might have been a factor in that. So yes, we'll see how many jobs and tourists and things like that it brings to the country. Yeah,
New Zealand's government says it's going to remove some of the tax breaks that were offered to the production team from Amazon. It does make you wonder, though, whether there might be a few tax sweeteners in there from the British government, because film is often one of those things, isn't it, that gets extra help. We will wait and see. Geraldine Scott and James as well. James, thank you very much for that, James Lure, and we will speak to both of you again at 11:30. Thank you very much for your company. Sport coming up next. I'll be back with all the news at 11, and then we'll have more papers at 11:30.